got some weird stuff growing in my garden this year. Well, here's the woodchip garden that we've got going on. And I didn't amend any of this stuff. I've left it here for a couple years. It's just been dropped off and I've spread it out. And my last huge woodchip mound, the chickens kind of did their way with it, but this year we just started planting right into it. And some of the stuff that was planted from seed that didn't get eaten did great, is doing great. And I want to take you guys on a tour and just kind of show you all the weird stuff I got going in here. We'll start out right here with this this beast of a squash. Look at it growing up and taking over the tomato cage right there. And I did that on purpose. I planted these next to the tomato cages because that's where they normally grow at. They grow along fence lines. Now this is a really weird squash. A lot of people may have never seen it. Some people may have seen it grown in the wild. This is the oldest summer squash. This is the oldest squash known in North America. This is the oldest summer squash right here. This is where all of your zucchinis, your summer squashes, those yellow summer squash came from. Even your pumpkins, even the pumpkins came from this variety right here. The Smithsonian's done research on it. They did an expedition into the Ozark Mountains in the 1980s. They found this variety, and then they found another variety also too. But this one in particular is the egg squash, or some people call it the egg gourd. Cucurbita pepo ovifera, meaning egg. And there's some interesting stories that when you look into the history of this squash right here, all the settlers used to grow squash because the Native Americans did. And when they came here, you know, when they started putting up fence lines and stuff like that and clearing areas out, they saw these squash growing along the fence. And for the longest time, even till just recently, until, you know, the Smithsonian did that expedition, a lot of people used to just think that they were just some garden escape, something escaped from a garden. They couldn't possibly be native. You know, it wasn't like there was, you know, domestication, plant domestication in North America. And that's the kicker here. That's the kicker. I love squash. When it comes to squash and pumpkins and the history of them, and the American Indians and the Mesoamericans, and you know, it was a very it was a staple. It was one of the things that they lived on. And they say that North American Indians didn't really domesticate their own crops. You know, by the book, they didn't say that. You know, everything came from South America. You know, the corn, the squash, the beans. You know, that's where the domestication happened. And that's not the case. This proves that that the wild ancestor of summer squash comes from the wild. It's this weird vining squash that'll take over a tree and grows along riverbanks in the south, all the way from Kentucky, Tennessee, the Ozark Mountains, you know, the rivers and the valleys and stuff like that. So this one right here, I tried getting seeds from it for a couple years ago from So True Seeds, and they were sold out of it. And the reason I was looking into this variety was because of the wild squash that I found growing down the road here, up a tree. And I'll leave a link to that down below of the wild squash. Actually, I'll put it right up here at the little ticker tape up there. And I'm right here on the side of the road. Here's the vine, and here's the squash right here. If you check it out, this is what they look like. Now, squash do grow wild in Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, and this is pretty neat. Look at this. This is a treat. This is a real treat right here, guys. There's another one. And they go all the way up this tree. If you can look up there, 15, 20 feet up, there's squash up there. All the way in the top of the tree up there. And there's actually a rotten one over here too. Oh, look where a couple of them fell. I gotta get this. Wow, check this out. Look at the long stem on this, guys. This is a wild native variety of squash fruit. Look at the long stem. Just growing wild here along the side of the road. Nobody watered it. Nobody planted it. There's a good bit of little squash here. You know, my summer squash I planted this year did horrible. It was dismal. It didn't do hardly anything. And yet here there is, right down the street, wild summer squash growing up a tree. You know, nature's always giving you signs. It's just you gotta see it, you know. But I was looking into the wild varieties of this squash, and I couldn't find. I found some seeds of that egg squash, that, you know, the one that looks like these little white eggs that really has no use. You can't really eat them. They're you know, they might be poisonous. They're super bitter, and they're not good for you. And I'm not even sure if the seeds are or not. But Native Americans took those, which aren't necessarily useful, and developed things that are. Like your classic jack-o'-lantern pumpkin came from this thing. And I couldn't find the seeds, but I found somebody that just did. Rareseeds.com. Baker Creek, they just recently started offering these. But last year, I found 3 of them. Solid white. And we went to a little haunted corn patch type of thing, and they had a bunch of little gourds everywhere for sale. Little gourds, I say gourds, they're actually squash. They're vining, wild gourd-like squash, Cucurbita pepo. And there was 3 of these. And check them out. They look like little eggs. And you can make little ornaments with them, like Christmas ornaments. And, oh man, something is biting the heck out of me. Sorry about that. Yeah, something's biting me. I think it's a big-ass horsefly. Anyways, check them out. I took one of them, one of the 3, made a Christmas ornament out of it, and the seeds from that one I planted here. And yeah, Rareseeds.com just started offering them. I've never seen them offer them before, but they say that they're Missouri gourd, Missouri egg gourd, net gourd, or something like that. And there's a really cool picture that they show of it growing along the creek. So someone must have done an expedition and found some growing out there. But I found these growing, not growing, but in a pile of other squash, other little viney gourd-like squash. So I'm going to actually put those back in the bag because it's pretty wet out here. But I'm hoping that they're going to also be white, and they're going to look just like these ones, the ones that I found. But there is a possibility that they may have crossed with whatever else that was growing, whatever type of squash or summer squash or Cucurbita pepo, any of that stuff that might have been growing with this. So this is my first year growing these egg squash. I've grown the wild squash that I found growing up a tree over here, and unlike these that are bitter, the wild squash that I found, the wild tree squash, actually smells and tastes like cucumbers. We actually ate them raw, and they're really, really good. And I've gotten a hold of some bitter squash. I've tried some tasting them, but you can't even put it in your mouth. It's so bitter. But the ones I found actually taste like cucumbers. You can eat them raw. They're really good. When you cook them, they're delicious. But not these. Not these apparently. But yeah, check them out. I've got a couple of them spread out. Look at the size of these leaves already on here. And it's growing up the tomato cage right there. So this is the ancestor of the pumpkin. The summer squash, the zucchini, all that stuff was a little white egg-like squash that grew wild around riverbanks, and American Indians, North American Indians, took those and domesticated them. They selectively bred them, and now we have zucchini and summer squash and all that other good stuff. And here's another one that's just spreading everywhere. And I actually, wow, look at the size of this leaf right here. That's pretty big. I actually planted them right next to summer squash. So you can see the difference. These guys vine, and these guys right here don't. They're just really bushy, just a short, they're already flowering. And that's why summer squash and zucchini don't really make it till the end of summer. Because the squash vine borer beetles, you know, the beetles just eat away at them. I think, pretty sure those are eggs for them. It's not even worth scratching them off. They're here. But the stuff that vines can root along the way. So if a vine beetle lays a little larvae down there and their little worm gets in there and it dies, it's okay because there's roots growing all the way along here where it touches the ground. Whereas summer squash and zucchini, it's a dwarf plant versus a vining plant. So, wow, look at this. Look at it coming all the way out to here. It's wanting to grab onto stuff. This grows up trees. I should have gave them more than just some tomato cages. But I've got some Yukon Gold potatoes that are just now popping up. They started popping up, so I started hilling them. Here's some sunflowers, tomato. These are all cherry tomatoes. Now the funny thing is since I gave everybody some fertilizer, that chicken poop fertilizer, not the sunflowers, but these tomatoes, they blew up. The growth on them is just unreal. They were just a little sticking up. And because of all the growth that they've gotten since then, they just fell over. They fell over because of all that extra green growth that just took over. Yeah, I mean, look at it. They're all laying down. This one right here needs to, I mean, I could probably start standing them up. And all the ones over here did the same thing. And I'll show you those. I'm kind of walking around a lot. But yeah, all the tomatoes right over here, they got tons of green growth, and the stem couldn't support it, so it just fell over. Now I've got some garlic. I planted super late. You're supposed to plant this stuff in the fall. I planted it like a month ago, but it's alright. It was starting to dry out, so I was trying to save it before it got completely dried out. And I put some more garlic along the side of these tomatoes right here. Sweet potatoes. Some sweet potatoes growing in here. Here's some onions I planted just a few weeks ago. You can see the tomato. Yeah, look at all that chicken poop fertilizer just made them blow up, and they just fell over. So, some more onions here. But yeah, a couple of the sunflowers survived. They didn't get totally eaten. And these are the mammoth sunflowers that have grown, gosh, I don't know, 5-6 years. And these are the gray striped ones. These aren't any fancy ones. They'll probably shoot out some black mammoth seeds and stuff like that because there was other ones growing with it, but they'll be alright. Here's a little pepper. It's doing alright. It's not too bad. This here is a purple sweet potato. This is really bushing out. Here's a little zucchini. Little zucchini dude. Actually, no. This one right here is not a zucchini. This is actually the egg squash also. Yeah, you can see it's starting to vine. I planted it next to this tomato cage so it would just grow up over the top of it. But yeah, look at this egg squash right here. I'm super stoked. I can't wait to get a whole bunch of these egg squash. And I'm sure I'll get some white ones. I'll get some striped ones. I might get some yellow ones and stuff like that. But I'm going to try to hand select it and just focus on the little white ones and stuff like that. And only keep those and grow those every year. But, or you could just order the seeds online. You know, I gotta be complicated, right? Alright. So, there's Gandalf the Scarecrow. There's the 2 corn patches with the squash growing around those. I'm going to talk about that squash. That's another weird squash I got growing. And here's some nice rows of potatoes that I've hilled up yesterday. And I've been trying to get out here and do some videos, but it's just been pouring rain. I did this in the rain. It has just been pouring rain. But yeah, the potatoes started to kind of shoot out. And sometimes I'll do 2 plantings of potatoes. I'll do some in the end of March and harvest those right about now, right about the first week of July, and then do another planting. But I didn't put these guys in until just a few weeks ago, so I'm only getting probably maybe 1 planting of potatoes this year. But I think I'm going to have a ton, hopefully. And the reason I just did Yukon is because they've done the best. I've done probably like 6 or 7 different varieties of potatoes, and Yukon is just a classic when it comes down to it. There's some more onions. You can see I got some more onions planted over here. And before I talk about the corn, I'll show it to you. Look how nice that looks with the squash growing around it. There's some little beans down there that I had to replant, but you can hardly see those. And there's the other corn patch. But I've got some raspberries growing right here in the middle, and it's been hard working around. I've got one there, and then a little guy right there. And then huge raspberry patch right there, wild patch. But alright, now this corn right here is not just any corn. This corn right here is Earth Tones Dent, and I hand selected all of the blue kernels, blue and purple, and I planted them in here, and then I hand selected all the green ones and planted them over there. And I had them in separate bags and stuff like that. And Earth Tones Den is like a rainbow flower corn. That's a mix of a bunch of different beautiful colors of corn and stuff like that. So I'm hoping to have some really pretty stuff come out of here. And this squash right here is not like the egg squash that you just saw. This is a completely, totally different species. This is machata, Cucurbita machata, your butternut squash. The Cherokee pumpkin that I've grown is a Cucurbita machata. It is the best, sweetest baking squash. You can't really bake a jack-o'-lantern pumpkin. I mean, you can, but they're not sweet. Sometimes they can be bitter, and because they're more related to the egg squash. These have been bred for hundreds or thousands of years, and they are the best tasting squash, machata, in my opinion. Maxima, Cucurbita maxima is a pretty good one too, and there's a few other ones, but I mean, I'm sure people argue that, oh no, this is the best tasting one, this is the best. You know, these have some of the orangest, darkest flesh, and these Cucurbita machata originated in a patch of butternut that I grew back in North Carolina in a community garden. And they're not normal butternut. I found one plant that was spitting out round, completely round butternut squash. And I wanted to keep it and create a new variety from that one squash. And there's one plant of butternut squash right here that is producing different types of squash. Now, it's a butternut squash, but it has no neck. And once in a while, you'll probably get maybe one of them that just doesn't grow right. you know, but normally other ones on the same plant would look normal. I don't know if you guys can see me, all right. But this plant right here is genetically different because both of the fruits on this plant have no neck. They're actually a butternut squash that's round. This is genetic diversity in your garden. Looks completely, totally different than these guys right here. So they're not as big, they're kind of smaller, and I'm hoping that it's going to be a new variety. And I've grown this was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, about 5 years ago. And since then, I've grown this twice, and I haven't showed any videos of it because I didn't know how it was going to turn out. I was just experimenting with it, and they all came out completely round. So these are a small, round butternut squash. They're not big. They are the perfect size baking squash. Even butternut can be too big, where you've got just so much of it. And if you've ever grown, you know, cucurbita machata or butternut, you know that, you know, sometimes you gotta like save half of it. And you know, growing Cherokee pumpkins, these giant machata, it's nice to have these little ones because the giant Cherokee pumpkins, man, they can be overwhelming when you're trying to put a pumpkin in your oven, you know, and bake it. You almost gotta cube it up and roast it like that, you know, bake it like that. But these guys are already starting to vine, and I started calling them butterball, you know, like the butternut. They look like I forgot what he said. I'm not going to quote the guy, but just like a butternut, they're round. Just call them a butterball. And I think I'm going to have a whole bunch. And that's exactly what's around this corn over here, too. Now, all the rain that we've had, the corn's starting to kind of lean a little bit. And that's one of the reasons why I try to thin it as much as I can. Because when you thin it, it just makes them stronger. And there's the beans that I planted. A little ring of beans. Yeah, now that it's got protection, the critters don't eat it. And also I had to say a little prayer, you know, make sure everything's good. Ask for permission to grow the beans. And I did, and they all did good. But what's cool about these beans is they're not just your normal bean. These are hyanthus beans. These are lab beans. These are an Asian bean where the bean pod and the stem is like a fuchsia pinkish purple. I've grown them in the past, and the flowers are like a beautiful violet purple blue, and they're gonna look really cool growing up the corn, giving it some support. And you can see the squash growing around it, hugging it. And this is the other corn patch with the butterball squash growing around it. And for some reason, this corn here is not as big and lush as this patch. And it could be the wood chips, different type of wood chips right over here. That pile over there might be a little bit deeper. And not to mention, it gets a little bit of shade from this big cherry tree right here. The sun kind of goes over. But I have noticed that there's 2 of them that have these watermelon type leaves. They don't have these big leaves like this. They have some watermelon leaves, and you can see how they normally look, and then bam. This one plant right here has got some watermelon looking leaves that's pretty cool. There's a lot of diversity there, you know, still. And who knows, maybe I'll just keep these watermelon looking leaves, round butternuts. That'll be cool. Here's a big old tomato. It's as tall as me. Here's an egg squash that's getting chewed up right now by little bugs. These leaves are getting really chewed up. It'll be alright. Here's some more potatoes we got growing. Little pepper dude. Another pepper dude. And then I planted 3 random ears of corn right there. Actually did about 4 or 5. And those ones there survived. and just for fun, just to spread out. It's a numbers game, you know. Spread your stuff out if you can. Here's a pepper growing with the potatoes, a little jalapeno. So yeah, just some potatoes, a lot of nightshade. You know, you've got potatoes, tomatoes, peppers. You know, there's even wild nightshade growing in here. And got a few corn patches, some flower corn and some baking squash. A little bit of onion and garlic. Another little sweet potato. Here's another pepper plant right here. There's a little squash flowering. I'm not sure if this is an egg squash. It might be an egg squash. Yeah, that might be an egg squash right there. And then I've got a summer squash. Yep, summer squash right here. Wild egg squash right there. A whole bunch of sweet potatoes growing in here. And what I'm going to do is, as these vines spread out, I'm going to cover them up. I'm going to cover them up so that way they root down and create little sweet potatoes there too. And they do better in soil that doesn't have a lot of nitrogen, so I'm hoping these wood chips don't have too much nitrogen in them. And we'll see how it goes. I've grown sweet potatoes a few different times. I've had okay success, nothing fancy, but we'll see. Maybe the wood chips are the magic thing. Oh, another tomato. Some cucumbers. I'll let this guy grow up here. There's another cucumber. Tomato. Some little onions. Yeah. A little bit here and there. Didn't really go too all out on this garden because I just wanted to kind of see how good the wood chips do this first year out here, and I'm sure next year is going to be even better than that. And so yeah, I just kind of wanted to experiment with a little bit of different stuff. And the coolest part is what I'm growing, you know, the varieties. I try to get some really, all my rare stuff, my stuff that's hard to come by, or stuff I've hand selected over the years. And we've got a butterball squash, egg squash, some blue and green corn, and yeah, some cherry tomatoes. And I keep seeing this right here. I think I'm looking at little fruit. Looks like we've got ourselves, let me drop down there, can you see it? There's a little squash dude right there, a little summer squash guy. As I was talking to you, I just could keep seeing this little fruit stuck to a flower out the corner of my eye. So, that's cool. We've been getting good tomatoes and cucumbers and stuff out in the food forest garden. The food forest garden's doing fantastic. And this here has been doing pretty good too. It's kind of starting to catch up. But so that's what we got going on in the Woodchip garden. And everything's getting nice and big. Within a month or two, it's just going to be all green. It'll just be a jungle in there. So, thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you guys on the next one. It's been rainy and cloudy the past couple days. You see how hazy it is. But it's nice. We needed the rain. All the fruit trees needed a good soak and everything too. So thanks for watching. See you guys later.